She was just the janitor, until the billionaire CEO found her crying beside a photo of a boy who looked eerily like his late son. But when he uncovered who she really was, and what his own company had done to her, everything changed. She didn't come to clean his floors, she came to rewrite his legacy. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The hallways of Wexler Tower were silent past midnight, stifling, gleaming, and indifferent to the lives that passed through them. On the 48th floor, fluorescent lights buzzed softly above as Eva Alvarez pushed her cleaning cart along the executive corridor. She moved slowly, methodically, as if afraid to disturb the expensive stillness that blanketed the air. She was 29, thin from too many skipped meals and quiet from too many griefs. A faded janitorial uniform clung to her frame, and her sneakers, once white, were stained with the unglamorous residue of countless scrubbed bathrooms and boardrooms. She hummed to herself, a lullaby in Spanish, soft and broken, as her gloved hands worked a cloth over the door handles. The last room of the night was always the hardest, Julian Blake's private office. Everyone knew his name, CEO of Wexler Innovations, ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. It was said he built an empire from ashes, turned orphanhood into an empire of code and patents. People whispered about him like a legend, distant, dangerous, cold. But Eva didn't care about office gossip. To her, it was just another space to clean, another place to pretend she wasn't tired or hungry or haunted. She slipped inside his office quietly, eyes cast down. The room was still in the same old Logan. His grip on his hands, chrome fixtures, his leather chair stood turned away from the city skyline beyond, casting long shadows across the floor. Eva moved to the desk, spraying cleaner, humming the same lullaby as she wiped away fingerprints no one noticed. She reached into her cart for a fresh cloth, and that's when it happened. A photo, tucked between her work apron and clipboard, fluttered to the ground. It landed, face up, illuminated by the pale light of the city behind the glass. A little boy, maybe 4 or 5, big brown eyes, a hospital bracelet on his wrist. He was smiling, toothless and wide, like he hadn't yet learned what pain was. Eva didn't see it fall. She kept scrubbing, humming, whispering under her breath. Feliz cumpleaños, mi amor. You'd be 9 today. And behind her, the low click of a door. She froze. The air shifted. She turned slowly. Julian Blake stood in the doorway. Sharp lines, expensive suit, no tie. His jaw was clenched. His eyes, gray, unreadable, were fixed on the photo. Eva's blood ran cold. She'd been caught with a personal item, in the CEO's office, talking to herself like a ghost. He stepped forward slowly, silent as a shadow. He picked up the photo, his fingers brushing the worn edges. "Who is he?" Julian asked, voice low. Eva couldn't breathe. She snatched the photo from his hand like it burned her. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "I didn't ask if you meant to drop it," he said, not harsh, but unreadable. "I asked who he is." Her lips trembled. "No one," she whispered. "It was a mistake." Julian didn't speak, he just watched her. Eva clutched the photo to her chest, turned, and nearly tripped over her own cart as she fled the room. The door shut behind her with a hiss of silence. Inside, Julian remained still. He stared at the desk, then at the floor where the photo had been. For a man who thrived on clarity, something about her shook him. The look in her eyes, the way her voice cracked when she said, "You'd be 9 today." Julian Blake sat at his desk long after the woman had gone. His hands rested on the glass surface, fingers laced together, but his mind was elsewhere, in pre-playing the moment she'd clutched that photo like it was all she had left of the world. He didn't know her name. He didn't need to until now. The building's staff list was something he rarely concerned himself with. Names, duties, shifts. It was all delegated. But her voice still rang in his ears, soft, aching, full of something he recognized but couldn't name. Grief, regret, love. You'd be 9 today. That one sentence stuck with him like a shard in the skin. It wasn't just the words. It was the way she'd said them, like she'd rehearsed them 100 times alone but never meant anyone to hear them. That kind of pain didn't come from nowhere. He glanced at the spot where the photo had fallen. A child, hospital bracelet. Eva, if he heard her name correctly from a previous board report, hadn't flinched until he asked the question. That reaction, it wasn't guilt, it was something deeper, something buried. He should have gone home. He had back-to-back meetings the next morning. But instead, he remained in the dim office, the city lights twinkling far below him. Somewhere out there, a woman scrubbed the floors of his building and whispered to a memory. And he couldn't stop thinking about it. Down on the 12th floor, Eva locked herself in the janitor's closet and sank to the floor, the photo pressed to her chest. Her breath came in sharp, quiet gasps. The air smelled like bleach and floor wax, but she barely noticed. What had she done? How could she be so careless? Julian Blake had seen her, had looked at her, not through her, not past her, but right at her. That alone was terrifying. But worse was the way he asked, who was he? As if he cared. She hadn't meant to whisper it aloud, but on that day, her heart always betrayed her. She'd tried to keep her promise, to stay invisible, but the pain, the memory, it lived in her veins. His name had been Leo. 9 years ago, she'd held him as he slipped away in a hospital room that smelled just like this one. He'd been everything, and then he was gone. No mother should bury a child. And no woman should still be working in the shadows, hiding a past that wasn't entirely her fault. But hiding was safer. She wiped her face and stood. If she lost this job, she'd lose the roof over her head, the cheap apartment she shared with an elderly widow, the chance to send money to her cousin back home. Everything depended on silence. She wouldn't let one photo ruin it all. The next morning, Eva arrived an hour early, hoping to avoid attention. She kept her head down, avoided the executive floor entirely, and focused on the lowest levels. Blacker than nascent cars, boiler room, the dusty maintenance corridors that never saw daylight. She thought she was in the clear, until a voice echoed behind her. You missed a spot. She turned. Julian Blake stood there, holding a cup of black coffee like it was a casual morning stroll. Except this was the boiler level. No one came down here. No CEO ever had. Her mouth went dry. Sir, I can fix it. That's not what I meant. She frowned. Julian gestured toward the floor, then to her chest. You're holding back. All the time, even in silence. Eva looked away. It's not your concern. Maybe not, he said, voice quiet. But last night, you said something I can't unhear. Eva stood frozen. Julian didn't move closer. He just added, whoever he was, I'm sorry. Her eyes stung. You don't know anything. No, he admitted, but I'd like to. And then he walked away, leaving her staring after him in stunned silence. In a world where no one saw her, someone finally did. Julian Blake had never adjusted his schedule for anyone. Not for clients, not for investors, not even for his board. But for the first time in his career, he started reshaping his calendar, just enough to cross paths with her. He didn't make it obvious. Eva worked late nights, always in the shadows, so Julian began staying a little longer. Meetings wrapped up at 6, but he'd linger until 8, sometimes 9. A file left open, a fake call made, an excuse to pass through the corridors where she mopped, wiped, and vanished before anyone could notice her. She noticed him, though. The first time she caught him watching her mop the north hallway, she stiffened, like a deer sensing danger. But he only nodded and said, "Long night?" She muttered something, maybe always. The next evening, he left 2 cups of coffee on a bench near the service elevator. One black, one sweetened with cream and hazelnut. She picked the second without hesitation and walked away without a word. But the following night, she left a napkin tucked beneath the empty cup. On it was a single word, scribbled in blue ink. Thanks. It became a strange ritual. Coffee left quietly, napkin notes in reply, small conversations about weather, fatigue, the smell of bleach in her clothes. And finally, one evening near midnight, he asked what had been sitting on the edge of his thoughts since the photo. His name? Julian asked gently, his voice low, almost hesitant. What was it? She didn't answer right away. But when she finally did, her voice trembled. Lucas! Julian looked at her with the kind of attention most people never gave her. Tell me about him. Eva blinked fast, trying to chase the tears before they came. He was born with a heart defect. We spent more nights in hospitals than at home, but he smiled like he didn't know pain. He loved stars. His favorite word was again. Every time we finished a song or story, he'd say, again. Julian didn't interrupt, just listened. Then one night his monitor beeped wrong, Eva whispered. I called, no one came. They thought I was being dramatic. By the time someone checked, it was too late. Julian clenched his jaw. I had nothing left, no home, no job. I was halfway through my nursing training. I left school. I didn't want to be near hospitals, near people, near anything that reminded me. Her voice cracked. So I cleaned. He wanted to tell her she didn't belong scrubbing floors. But she wasn't asking for pity. So instead, he nodded once. Thank you for telling me. That night, Julian stayed in his office longer than usual. Her words played on repeat in his head. He couldn't sleep until he did something else. He logged into the company HR database, pulled her employee file. Eva Marquez, 30 years old, no criminal history, limited employment gaps. References that seemed generic but functional. Education section, 2 years nursing school, withdrawn, prior internship, St. Clair's Community Hospital. His heart paused. St. Clair's was the small charity-run hospital founded by his late mother, decades ago. It had been a haven for those who had nowhere else to go. It was where he used to visit as a boy, shadowing her through pediatric wings, handing out coloring books to kids with IVs in their arms. And Eva had been there. It wasn't just a coincidence. She had once walked halls of healing. Now she scrubbed them. Julian sat back, overwhelmed. She wasn't just a maid. She was someone who'd once believed in something. Until the world broke her. And he couldn't stop wondering. What would it take to help her believe again? The next time he saw her, she was kneeling near the elevators, scrubbing at a coffee spill someone had left without apology. Her hands were raw, pink around the knuckles. The sleeves of her uniform were damp. Julian crouched beside her, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the bleach-scented tile beneath them. Don't you ever rest? He asked softly. Eva glanced up, startled. Resting doesn't pay rent. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I looked up your file. Her scrubbing stopped. She froze, her body tight with instinctive fear. Am I being fired? No, he said quickly. No, Eva, I wanted to understand. She stood slowly, wringing out the cloth in her hand. What is it you're trying to understand, Mr. Blake? Julian straightened too, and held her gaze. Why someone with your education, with your heart, is spending her life hidden in the shadows. She looked away. Because I deserve to. His voice dropped. Who told you that? Ava's hands trembled slightly. Grief did. The honesty of it hit him like a punch to the chest. I'm not trying to interfere, Julian said. But I remember that hospital. St. Clair's. My mother built it. She believed healing wasn't just for the body. It was for the soul. Do you believe that too? Ava whispered. Then the system failed the only soul I had left. She turned to leave, but Julian stopped her with a question. If you could go back, if the pain didn't define you, what would you be doing? She didn't answer immediately. But then, she whispered, I'd still be walking those halls, just not with a mop. That night, Julian couldn't sleep. He sat by his fireplace, sipping tea that had long since gone cold. His thoughts kept circling back to her. To Lucas, to the photo, to the words she had whispered with cracked strength. The next morning, he made a call. "David," he told his assistant, "pull every record we have on Eva Marcus's time at the Claires. I want transcripts, faculty notes, anything." By noon, the information landed in his inbox. Type percentile student, praised for intuitive care. One professor wrote, "She treats patients like their family. She listens like a physician and cares like a mother." Then abrupt withdrawal, no explanation, just vanished. Julian closed the file, but not the curiosity. Back at the skyscraper, Eva was cleaning the conference room when she spotted something on the table. A single white rose resting atop a note. She hesitated before touching it. The note was simple. "You don't belong in the shadows. Let me prove it." No signature, but she knew who it was from. Her chest tightened. She tucked the note into her apron pocket, heart thudding. That night, she passed Julian in the hallway. He didn't speak, just gave her a gentle nod. Respectful, quiet. She paused, then turned back. "My son wanted to be an astronaut," she said suddenly. "We used to tape glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling. He'd fall asleep counting them." Julian looked at her gently. "Do you still have them?" She smiled faintly. "Every single one." A beat of silence passed before he said, "Maybe it's time to hang them somewhere new." She didn't answer. But for the first time in years, she imagined its stars on a ceiling, not stained by grief, but by hope. Maybe, just maybe, something was beginning again. Julian stood in the middle of his sleek corner office, silent as the artist he'd hired unveiled the restored painting. It was a vibrant piece, a field of sunflowers beneath a sky streaked with gold and dusk. The same painting had once hung in the children's wing of the hospital his mother had helped build decades ago. And now it hung here, freshly restored, quiet and proud. That night, Eva entered the office, mop and supplies in hand, unaware of what waited on the wall. The moment her eyes landed on it, she froze. Her knees buckled before she realized it, and she dropped the mop. A choked sound escaped her lips, half sobbed, half gasped, as she stumbled forward and pressed her palm to the canvas. Her voice shook. Lucas loved this? This was the only thing that calmed him during procedures. Tears welled, uninvited, unrestrained. Julian, who had been reviewing reports silently behind his desk, slowly stood. "I thought it might mean something to you." Eva turned to him, her eyes red, and for the first time, she didn't hide. "The night he died, I begged them. He couldn't breathe. I told them something was wrong, but they were understaffed. They said to wait, that he wasn't critical." She swallowed hard. "I held him in my arms while he struggled, Julian. I knew what was happening, I knew. But they didn't listen. And then, he was just gone." Julian's throat tightened. He didn't know what to say. What could possibly be said? Olivia sat down on the floor, exhausted by the memory. "They wouldn't let me in the ICU afterward, said it was policy. Like my son was just a chart?" Silence stretched between them, thick and aching. Julian broke it quietly. "Which hospital?" "St. Vincent," she whispered. "East Wing, February 7th. I still remember the exact time. 2:41. His blood ran cold. He didn't tell her right away. Not yet, but as soon as she left that night, he stormed into the company archives. The name haunted him, St. Vincent. He remembered seeing it once in a merger report, years ago. A failing hospital system, acquired quietly and rebranded under a larger network, one of many absorbed into the Blake Health Initiative. He dug through old acquisition files, pulling PDFs and contracts until the digital paper trail led him to a folder labeled St. Vincent Litigation Review. Inside it, his eyes scanned faster than his heart could keep up. There it was. A case number. A complaint, filed by Eva Maria Delgado, against St. Vincent Medical. Child fatality due to alleged negligence. Lawsuit closed. Settled in mediation. No press release. The final page was stamped with "Do not escape. Confidential letter." Julian leaned back, stunned. The hospital hadn't just failed her, they had silenced her. And he had signed the merger. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked through more files. Donations, press campaigns, rebranding efforts. He'd never seen her name on any flagged list. Why? Because they buried it. He sat there for hours, staring at the screen, guilt blooming in his chest like ink in water. That evening, he took his coat and left the tower, heading toward the one place he hoped she might be. Eva sat on a worn stone bench tucked away in the park behind the hospital, the same spot she visited every Thursday, rain or shine. Beside her sat a small metal plaque with a child's name etched into it, Lucas Delgado, with a tiny heart next to the dates. Her fingers brushed the edge of the metal as she exhaled slowly, fighting the tears. She didn't hear Julian approach until he was standing beside her. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said gently, hands tucked into his coat pockets, "but I had to see you." Ava didn't look at him. Her voice was flat. "I come here to remember him the way I want to, not the way they took him." Laura slowly sat down beside her, the bench creaking beneath his weight. "I went through the files," he said. "The hospital you named, St. Vincent. It was one of ours. We acquired it 3 years ago." She turned to him, startled. "Yours?" He nodded, shame clouding his expression. "Under one of our subsidiaries. I didn't know, not until tonight. But it was us, Eva. It was my signature on the merger. My team who buried the negligence claim. I helped erase your voice." Her breath caught in her throat. "I thought it was just bad luck," she said bitterly. "But it wasn't. It was you." Julian flinched, but didn't look away. "It was me, and I'm sorry, truly." For a long while, neither of them spoke, just the sound of wind rustling through the trees and a far-off child's laughter reminding them of all that had been lost. Eva finally broke the silence, her voice brittle. "I used to think I was being punished for pushing too hard, for being too poor, too loud, too desperate. But I wasn't wrong, Julian. They were—" He nodded slowly. "You weren't wrong. You were brave, and they failed you. I failed you." She looked down at her hands. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve the truth," he said, "and because I want to make it right, if I still can." Her eyes searched his. "You can't bring him back." "I know," Julian said softly, "but I can make sure no one else goes unhurt. Not again." Eva didn't answer. She turned her gaze back to the plaque, her shoulders trembling. "I restored the painting because I thought it might give you peace," he continued. "But peace without justice is just silence." She looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I've lived in silence for 9 years." Julian reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "There's going to be a review. I'm opening an internal investigation into every case buried during that merger, including yours. If you're willing, I'd like you to testify to be the voice for the others who never got one." Eva stared at the paper. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of something she thought had been lost forever. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You already are," he said. "You've survived everything we threw at you, and you still show up, still show you sing that hallway, still carry love in your voice when you speak of him. That's strength, Eva." She blinked hard, a tear falling onto her coat. "Thank you," she whispered. Julian stood slowly. "I'll be there when you speak, every step of the way." As he walked away, Eva looked back at the plaque. For the first time in 9 years, her lips curved, not into a smile, but into something quieter, braver, hope. Julian stood by the tall glass window of his office, the city's lights flickering beneath him like distant stars. His mind wasn't on the quarterly projections or board memos stacked on his desk. It was on a little boy with a hospital bracelet and the woman who never stopped mourning him. That morning, Julian had done the unthinkable. He walked into the legal department and demanded the file, the one marked Lucas Rivero, incident at 4719, settled confidentially. The air had turned cold the moment he placed his fingerprint on the digital lock. Inside was everything: the ignored complaints, the rushed diagnosis, the refusal to admit fault. One page in particular made his chest tighten. A statement from a nurse who recalled a young mother pleading in the hallway, begging, crying, being dismissed. Julian read every word, every line, and when he reached the end, he closed the file and said quietly to the head of legal, "We're reopening this." The fallout was immediate. By noon, the media had caught wind of it. Headlines spread like wildfire. CEO risks career to reopen tragic pediatric death case. Blake Corporation under fire for old negligence scandal. In a boardroom filled with sharp suits and colder eyes, Julian stood alone. The directors hurled questions and accusations. "You realize what you're doing to the company's image. You're implicating us, Julian. She was just a janitor. Why throw everything away for her?" Julian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "She's not just a janitor. She's a mother. And we're not going to be the kind of people who bury truth with settlements." By the end of the meeting, he made the decision for them. "I'm stepping down temporarily, so there's no conflict of interest during the investigation." Stunned silence followed. No one tried to stop him. That night, Eva sat alone on a bench in the hospital courtyard, tracing the edges of a worn photograph. She hadn't seen Julian since the news broke. Part of her wanted to disappear before more of her life was dragged into the spotlight, before more memories resurfaced. Her fingers were shaking when she opened her locker later that evening. A letter fell out. It was old, the paper faded, the envelope brittle. It was addressed to Mrs. M. Blake, Julian's mother. Inside was a handwritten message in graceful cursive. "If you're reading this, it means I never finished my final wish. I dreamed of creating a place where every mother felt heard, where no child's pain was ever ignored. If you can, please continue it in my name, not for glory." Abel clutched the letter, tears sliding down her cheeks. She wasn't sure how it ended up in her locker, but part of her believed Julian had placed it there. Hours later, she found him waiting outside the glass entrance, coat draped over his arm, eyes searching for her. She didn't speak, she just held the letter up. He nodded slowly. "It was hers. I thought, maybe you were meant to see it." Ava's voice cracked. "Maybe your mother's dream is why we met." Julian looked at her, really looked, like he'd finally found the thread that connected all the pieces. "I think it is." He handed her a folder. Inside was a proposal, detailed, thoughtful, and already approved by his interim team, a grief support program named after his mother, funded entirely by the foundation. And at the bottom, in elegant type, was the name of the recommended program director, Eva Rivera. Her eyes widened. "I don't know if I can do this." "You can," Julian said gently, "because you already are." "Finally. I'm just the girl who wipes the glass," she whispered. Julian smiled, soft and unwavering. "No. You're the one who sees through it." Eva stared down at the folder again, her fingers tightening around the edges. It was more than an offer, it was a doorway, a chance to become someone she hadn't dared imagine in years. But fear sat heavy on her chest. "What if they don't want me?" she murmured. "The board, the staff, the families. What if they see me and only see a janitor?" Julian stepped closer, his voice low. "Then they'll be blind, because I see someone who fought for her child when no one listened. Someone who saw a dying boy and acted while trained doctors hesitated. And someone who, despite every reason to give up, kept showing up. That's who I see." She blinked fast, the words sinking in like rain after a drought. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not since before Lucas, not since she believed she could make a difference. Julian reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple pin silver small, with the initials MBH engraved on it. Margaret Blake Healing. The hospital had given them only to board members and medical directors in the past. He held it out. "It's yours now. Not because of what you were, but because of who you are." Ava stared at it for a long moment before her trembling fingers took it. The next morning, the media swarmed again. This time the narrative had shifted. Cleaning woman appointed to lead healing initiative. And though some questioned the move, most were moved by the story, profuse. In a press conference held in the same marble atrium where she once mopped floors, Avi stood beside Julian. A podium separated them, but their connection was unshakable. She spoke softly at first, her voice uncertain. "I never imagined standing here," she began. "For a long time, I lived in the shadow of loss. My son, Lucas, was everything to me. When I lost him, I lost myself too." The room fell silent, even the cameras paused. I hid behind uniforms and empty hallways, afraid of being seen. But then, someone saw me anyway. Her eyes met Julian's briefly, and the emotion that passed between them needed no translation. "And I realized," she continued, "that healing doesn't just come from medicine, it comes from being heard, from being believed, from someone saying, 'Your story matters.' That's what this new center will be, a place where no one's pain is too small. No voice too soft." The applause that followed was genuine, heartfelt, and thunderous. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Eva found herself standing beside the painting of the boy with stars in his eyes, Lucas's favorite. It now hung at the entrance of the center, framed in gold beneath a plaque that read, "Or in the Rivera room, where healing begins." Julian joined her, quietly admiring the artwork. "I had the board approve the name this morning," he said. "They didn't argue." Eva touched the plaque gently. "He would have loved this." Julian turned to her. He would have been proud. She looked up at him, the man who had once been a stranger in a glass tower. "You didn't have to do any of this." "I know," he said, his voice thick with feeling. "But I wanted to." Eva took a slow breath, one that felt like the first in years. "So, what now?" He smiled, eyes soft. "Now, we build something that never forgets where it came from." She glanced around at the bright lights, the polished floors, the quiet hum of a new beginning, and for the first time since Lucas's death, hope didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a promise. A promise she was finally ready to keep. The courtroom was packed. Elizabeth, Laura, Rosamond, and Emma all sat, adultery, press, hospital staff, Logus in dark suits, and a few quiet faces Eva recognized from long nights at Vexlor. Eva looked out, but she could feel his presence like a shield. Eva stood at the witness stand, palms slightly damp. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and a tired posture, gave her a gentle nod. "Ms. Rivera, tell us what happened that night." Eva exhaled slowly. "It was February 19th, she began, voice steady but laced with emotion. "Lucas had been running a fever for days. I took him to Westvale Medical Park of the Vexlar Hospital Network. I begged them to run tests. He had a congenital heart defect. I knew something was wrong." Courtroom was silent. He told me it was flu, that I was being dramatic. A nurse tried to help, she looked scared, but a doctor pulled her away. Tears threatened, but Eva blinked them back. "Lucas went into cardiac arrest while we were in the waiting room. I screamed for help. They came too late." A soft gasp broke in the back of the courtroom. Julian's jaw clenched. His eyes locked on her. "And what did they tell you after?" "I handed me a pamphlet about grief counseling," Eva whispered. "No one said his name. No one said they were sorry." The board's lawyer, a man with slicked hair and a stiff suit, stood. "Rivera, it's been years. Isn't it possible that your recollection is affected by trauma?" Eva turned her head slowly, unflinching. "I don't need perfect memory to remember how it felt when my son died in my arms while people ignored me." The gallery stirred. Next, a nurse was called to the stand, a woman in her 40s with nervous hands and a trembling voice. She took a deep breath. "I was working triage that night. Ms. Rivera came in. She was panicked but composed. I flagged the chart. But then the attending physician told me to downgrade it to non-urgent." "Why?" the judge asked. She hesitated. "Because he said we had VIP patients arriving and didn't want the ER clogged. When I raised concerns, I was told, off the record, that if I wanted to keep my job, I'd stay quiet." Gasps spread like a wave across the room. The board's lawyer stood. "Do you have proof of these conversations?" She admitted. "But I've lived with the guilt every day since." Eva stared at her, lips parted, stunned. The judge looked to the gallery, then to the defense. Any further questions? Before the attorney could respond, Julian stood. Your Honor, if I may speak? The courtroom rustled, murmurs rising. Mr. Blake, this is highly irregular, the judge warned. He stepped forward anyway. I am the current CEO of Vexlar Enterprises and the son of its founder. What I have to say may violate every PR strategy we've ever paid for, but I believe truth matters more than optics. He looked to Eva, then back to the room. Company paid out a quiet settlement 2 years after Lucas Rivera's death. I found the file buried in a confidential report labeled Non-Escalated Claims. No apology was issued. No responsibility was taken. He pulled out the folder and placed it on the bench. I am here to say, this wasn't just a failure, it was a cover-up. The judge stared at him for a long, heavy moment. Continue, she said softly. Julian turned to the gallery. You owe Eva Rivera more than an apology. We owe her justice, and we owe her son the dignity he was denied. The judge flipped through the file Julian had handed over. Her fingers hovered over the sealed settlement documents, the ones stamped confidential, tucked away like dust under a silk rug. Miss Rivera, she said finally, looking over the top of her glasses, you've been called a janitor, a grieving mother, and now a truth teller. I want you to know I see all of it. Her lips trembled. For the first time in years, someone in authority didn't look at her with pity or dismissal, but with respect. The court recessed briefly. When the judge returned, her tone was steady, resolute. Court finds that the negligence surrounding Lucas Rivera's death was not only a systemic failure, but was followed by a deliberate concealment of truth by individuals within Vexlar's leadership at the time. Gasps and murmurs rippled across the room. Eva held her breath. Rivera is to receive a full, public apology issued by Vexlar Enterprises. In addition, financial compensation is ordered, not for the loss of a child, which no amount could repair, but for the erasure of accountability and voice that followed. Tears spilled silently down Eva's cheeks. Julian bowed his head, his hands gripping the edge of the bench. For him, this wasn't about headlines. It was about restoring the dignity of a woman who had been buried by silence. As cameras clicked and reporters leaned forward, Eva whispered to herself, Lucas, they said your name. She didn't cry because of the money. She didn't cry because she'd won. She cried because her son's life, his little laugh, his heartbeat, the light in his eyes, was no longer a forgotten file or a hallway tragedy. It was real again, recognized, spoken aloud in a room filled with power and truth. Hallen approached her slowly, unsure whether to speak or just be present. You did it, he said softly. Not me, not the board. Eva looked at him. Her voice was hoarse from emotion, but clear. You gave me the chance to be heard? He shook his head. You just reminded the world that a voice doesn't need a title, just truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters flooded the steps. Eva shielded her eyes from the flashes, overwhelmed. Julian leaned toward her. We can go out the back. But Eva didn't move. She turned to face the cameras. For once, she wasn't invisible. I'm not here because I wanted revenge, she said, voice trembling but loud. I'm here because no one else should ever have to beg for their child to be seen. Lucas mattered, and I hope this changes something. There was no applause, just silence, the kind that respects pain. Julian placed a hand on her shoulder, light, supportive. Later that evening, Eva returned home. She took out the tiny memory box she kept under her bed, the one with Lucas's last drawing, his hospital ID bracelet, and the birthday card he never got to open. She lit a candle beside it, then opened her window to let the breeze in. The city lights sparkled, but for the first time in years, they didn't feel so far away. In the dark, Julian's voice echoed from memory. This company owes her justice. It did. And justice, at last, had found her. In the break room, her locker already open, her hands trembling as she folded the few belongings she kept there. A small framed drawing, Lucas's son and stick figures. was wrapped gently in an old scarf. Her name tag lay on the counter, face down. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. No formal resignation, just silence. Too much attention had found her lately. She hadn't asked for it, and though justice had been served, Eva felt exposed, like a wound that hadn't finished healing. Julian entered quietly. He didn't knock or announce himself. He simply stood in the doorway, watching her zip the warm duffel bag shut. "See, this is how you leave?" His voice was soft, not angry, just disappointed. Eva flinched. "It's not about you, Julian." "I know," he said, walking in, "but it's not just about you either. You matter to people now. You've become more than a name in a file." She looked up, her eyes puffy but steady. "I didn't want any of this. I just wanted peace." Julian studied her, then held out his hand. "Come with me," he said. She hesitated. "Where?" He didn't answer. She followed him anyway. They climbed the back stairwell, the old emergency steps no one used anymore. At the top, the heavy rooftop door creaked open to a familiar sight. The city skyline glowing against the dusk, the wind brushing softly over the edge. It was the place she often came to at the end of long shifts. The place she felt closest to Lucas. Eva blinked back tears. "You knew I came here." Julian nodded. "Every night, I'd watch the security cameras. You thought you were alone, but you weren't." She turned away, overwhelmed. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't kneel, he didn't speak right away. Just stood beside her. "I'm not offering you a title or a new position," he said, voice low. "I'm offering you a life. One with me in it. One where you never have to carry everything alone again." Eva covered her mouth. The box in his hand trembled slightly. "I'm not whole anymore," she whispered. Julian looked down at the box. "Neither am I." Then he turned to face her fully. "But maybe together we're enough." She dropped her hands and stared at him. The ring inside the box wasn't flashy. It was simple, elegant, gold with a small sapphire, the color of Lucas's favorite blanket. Tears streamed freely now, not from grief, but from something she hadn't dared feel in a long time. Hope. Eva took a breath, then nodded. She said, voice shaking, "Yes." Julian didn't cheer. He didn't exhale. He just stepped forward and wrapped her in his arms, as if anchoring her to the earth. Behind them, the sky deepened into shades of navy and violet. Later that week, their wedding took place in a small glass chapel on the rooftop. Only a handful of people attended. Leo, Julian's assistant, and Eva's old neighbor, who once watched Lucas during her night shifts. And at the front, in a place of honor, was a framed photo of Lucas, smiling. His crayon drawing of 3 stick figures, one tall, one curly-haired, one small, sat below it on the altar. As Eva walked down the short aisle, her eyes never left that photo. She whispered as she passed, "You're still with me." Julian turned, his face open and raw. When she reached him, he took both her hands. No speeches, no grand declarations. Just this: "You saved my son's laughter. Let me spend my life giving you joy." Eva replied, "Then let's start right here, right now." The rooftop breeze carried the scent of roses and rain as the officiant softly began. The sun had dipped low, casting golden light across the modest gathering. But Eva only saw Lucas. The picture, the drawing, the reminder that love, once lost, could still lead to new beginnings. Julian's hand gently wrapped around hers. His thumb brushed her knuckles, steadying, grounding, promising. "You may exchange vows," the officiant said. Julian looked into her eyes. "Eva, when I first saw you, I saw someone trying to disappear. But what I've learned since is that you've spent your life saving others while letting no one save you. You carried grief with grace and still found room for kindness. You gave my son his name back, you gave me back my humanity. I don't want a perfect life. I want one that includes every scar, every shadow. As long as you're in it." Eva's lips trembled. She squeezed his hand. "Julian," she whispered, "I thought I was meant to suffer quietly, that my story ended the day I lost Lucas. But you saw through the glass. You saw me. You didn't try to fix the broken pieces. You held them. And now, I want to hold yours too." Leo clapped from his seat, then covered his mouth, cheeks red. The small group chuckled, tears in every eye. Julian turned to the photo of Lucas, then to the drawing. "I hope," he said softly, "he knows I'm trying." Eva nodded, voice thick with emotion. "He does." They placed the rings, hers shaking as she slid the band onto his finger. His thumb lingered against hers. "You may now kiss." But Julian didn't wait. Their lips met gently, reverently, the kiss not of triumph, but of quiet survival, of loss honored and futures reclaimed. As they turned to face the others, rose petals drifted from the rooftop's edge, Leo and Eva's neighbor tossing them with clumsy joy. Some caught in Eva's curls. Julian brushed one away. Music played from a single speaker. No orchestra, no flashbulbs. Just one sweet song echoing softly as the wind picked up. Later that evening, when the others had gone, Eva stood alone by the rooftop railing. She stared out at the city skyline, the same view she'd seen for years after mopping the marble floors of that high-rise. Julian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I used to come up here to feel close to Lucas," she said, "and now I feel like he's walking me forward instead of pulling me back." Julian rested his chin on her shoulder. "You were always walking forward, Eva, even when the world tried to stop you." They stayed there for a while, silent, watching the stars begin to blink to life. Then Julian reached into his coat again and pulled out a small silver locket. He handed it to her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a tiny folded drawing, Lucas's son, the stick figures. Beneath it, etched in careful script, were the words, "Forever 3." Eva covered her mouth. Julian whispered, "Because love doesn't end, it just grows new roots." She looked up at him. "And sometimes," she replied, "those roots bloom on rooftops." He smiled. They stood there, long after the city had gone quiet, the last lights in the tower dimming around them, the wind wrapping around their new beginning like a hush over old pain. Eva was no longer just the woman who wiped the glass. She was the woman who saw through it and stepped into the light beyond. The sign outside shimmered in the soft morning light. Lucas's Garden, a center for healing and hope. It stood where an old clinic used to be, now transformed into a space that pulsed with warmth, walls painted with pastel murals, laughter echoing down bright halls, and flowers blooming outside, tended lovingly by volunteers. The center had taken months of planning, but when the doors finally opened, it felt like something sacred had begun. Eva walked through the main corridor, a soft smile on her face as she straightened a crooked picture frame on the wall. It was a child's watercolors, crookeds of blue and yellow with a sun in the corner. Below it, written in crayon, "It doesn't hurt as much when someone listens." She turned the corner and stepped into the break room, where Julian stood with 2 coffees. He handed one to her. "Thought I'd catch you before your sweep," he grinned. She smirked, shaking her head. "I told you I start every morning with the mop. It reminds me where I came from." Julian looked at her with admiration. Even now, Eva insisted on keeping part of her routine, the quiet time before sunrise when she cleaned the floors herself, not out of obligation, but remembrance. Each hallway she scrubbed was a tribute to the boy she once lost and the strength she found afterward. As they sipped coffee, staff and volunteers trickled in, greeting Eva with a warmth usually reserved for old friends. She knew all their names, remembered birthdays, and checked on them with the kind of care that came from living on the margins herself. Later that day, a young mother arrived at the center holding a frail little boy in her arms. His skin was pale, and his eyes seemed tired in a way no child's should be. The staff welcomed her, helped her register, but the woman's hands trembled. Her voice cracked as she tried to explain. Eva approached slowly, kneeling beside them. "You don't have to explain everything now," she said gently. "Just let him rest, and let me sit with you." That night, when most had gone home and the halls dimmed to soft lighting, he moved through the quiet things. He moved through the quiet center, passing sleeping bags in the reading nook, half-drawn crayon portraits on tables, and forgotten teddy bears tucked into corners. In one of the therapy rooms, he found Eva. She was in an armchair, head tilted back, fast asleep. Curled on her lap was the little boy, his breathing now steady, his small fingers wrapped around the hem of her sweater. The boy's mother was asleep on a nearby couch, blanket pulled up to her chin. Julian stood in the doorway for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched. Watched the way Eva's hand rested protectively over the boy's back. Watched the way the space seemed to glow around her, like the entire building was built from her stillness, her grace. He whispered to himself, "This is what legacy looks like." He turned out the light and left the door ajar. The next morning, Eva woke with a stiff neck and a full heart. The little boy was still curled against her, sleeping peacefully. His mother stirred across the room and whispered, "Thank you. I didn't know how to keep going last night." Eva gave her a gentle smile. "You don't have to know yet. You just have to keep breathing." The day moved on, with its rhythm of laughter and tears, of broken stories stitched gently, with warmth and understanding. That afternoon, Eva stepped into her small office, tucked behind the resource library. On the desk was a wrapped package, blue ribbon tied loosely at the corners. She paused, then opened it. Inside was a note and something small, something impossibly tiny and profound. A pregnancy test. Positive. Her breath caught. The room seemed to still. When Julian walked in minutes later, Eva turned to him, holding the test like something fragile, sacred. Her voice trembled. "I didn't plan this. I didn't even think I could feel something like this again." Julian's expression didn't falter. He stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "I know we'll never replace Lucas," she whispered. "I wouldn't want to, but I think this is something else, not instead of him, but more love. A new chapter." Julian's eyes filled. He sank to one knee, not in a dramatic proposal, but in reverence, in gratitude, in awe. He kissed her belly, his lips trembling. "Then let's raise the world together," he said. Eva laughed softly through her tears, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Are we ready for this?" she asked. He looked up at her. "You were ready, the moment you held someone else's child just to give a mother one more hour of hope. I've just been trying to catch up." They sat on the small couch in her office, shoulders touching, hands resting gently over the future that now grew between them. That night, as the city outside flickered with life, Eva returned to the rooftop, the same place she used to stand after every shift, staring into the skies or whispering to the stars. This time, she wasn't alone. Julian stood beside her, his arm around her waist, and in her other hand, she held a small candle. She lit it carefully, protecting the flame from the wind. "Treat Lucas," she said softly. The flame glowed, steady and quiet. "And for all the children who didn't get their second chance," Julian added. She turned to him. "But we're building something now, right?" He nodded. "Lucas's garden is only the beginning." They stood there for a long while, side by side, with the wind brushing their faces and the candlelight flickering between them. No longer just survivors of pain, but carriers of legacy, builders of healing, and parents again, not in the shadow of grief, but in the bright, trembling light of something new. Eva sat in the garden courtyard of the center that now bore her son's name, Lucas's garden. Children laughed around her, chasing bubbles, while volunteers helped parents fill out intake forms. The sun cast soft golden light through the trees, and Eva rested her hand on her belly, where new life stirred. She had traded her mop and uniform for something different now, a soft blue dress and a clipboard, but she still wiped the benches down herself every morning. Old habits rooted in humility. Julian walked toward her, carrying 2 cups of tea. His suit was slightly wrinkled. He had been meeting with the new board of directors all day, but his smile, the one he saved just for her, was still intact. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. Eva nodded. "Better than okay." A little girl tugged at her dress. "Miss Eva, the fish in the pond are hungry again." Eva grinned and passed her a tiny container of food. "Just a pinch. They've already eaten 3 times." As the girl ran off, Julian watched her, then turned to Eva. "She reminds me of someone." Eva raised an eyebrow. "Someone brave," he said softly. "Someone who knows how to love even after everything was taken from her." Eva looked away, quiet. "Julian, there's something I need to tell you. Before we bring a child into this world, I want you to know the truth. The whole truth." He waited patiently. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded, weathered envelope. "This was my name before everything, before I changed it to Evra Martinez. My real name is Elena Cruz." Julian blinked. "Cruz? As in Dr. Gabriel Cruz?" She nodded. "He was my father, the pediatric surgeon, the one who disappeared in the press scandal when the hospital he helped fund went bankrupt." Julian sat back. "I remember. It was national news. The media painted him as a fraud." Eva said, her voice breaking. "He was a good man who made one desperate financial move to keep his clinic alive. He saved thousands of children, but the world only remembered the fall. And you? I changed my name after the trial. My mother moved us to another state. I was still in school when I lost her too, and then Lucas. I didn't think I could ever be proud of where I came from again." Julian reached over and took the envelope gently from her hands. "You've spent your whole life trying to carry the pain alone." Eva looked at him, eyes brimming. "I didn't want you to love someone built from lies." "I don't," he whispered. "I love someone built from strength." They sat there in silence, the garden breathing around them, children laughing, wind rustling the leaves above. Later that week, the center hosted its first founder celebration, an event to honor stories of resilience. Parents, staff, doctors, and donors gathered beneath white tents draped in string-light. Eva stood at the podium, nervous but steady. She looked down at the note she had written, but then folded it and tucked it away. "I used to think my name had to stay hidden," she began. "That who I once was didn't matter as much as who I became. But I realize now, they are the same person." She looked across the crowd, eyes landing on Julian, standing beside a plaque that read, "In honor of Lucas Cruz Martinez, a light in the darkest hour." "My real name," she continued, "is Elena Cruz. I am the daughter of a man the world misunderstood. I am the mother of a boy who taught me love can survive grief. And I am the woman who now builds spaces for others to find healing. Because healing isn't just about medicine, it's about being seen." Applause filled the courtyard. Julian stepped forward, wrapping his arm around her waist. That night, after the crowd faded and the lanterns dimmed, Eva walked through the center's halls one last time before locking up. She passed a door with a new gold plate that read, "Director Elena Cruz Martinez." She smiled. She had taken her name back, not just the one she was born with, but the one she had earned. Outside, beneath the stars, she and Julian sat on the same bench where she once cried alone. Now, her hand was held, her future waiting. She whispered into the wind, "Lucas, I hope you see this." A breeze stirred. Then Julian spoke, his voice low, reverent. "Your name will never be forgotten again." 9 months later, Eva gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Hope Elena Blake. At the naming ceremony, Eva held her daughter up to the morning sun, surrounded by flowers, friends, and the sound of children playing. And as she looked at the sky, she said softly, "We carry your name, Lucas, in every heartbeat, in every step forward." In the garden, 2 trees now stood side by side, one older, one newly planted. Love had taken root, and her name had bloomed.